Forbes Women Africa's The Unstoppables, Climate Changed, From Crisis to Cry-sis, it's here and now. Wanjira Mathai is a Kenyan environmentalist, Managing Director for Africa and Global Partnerships, World Resources Institute. A nature's warrior, she has been on Time magazine's list of 100 most influential women 4 times. Having worked with her mother and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Wanjira Mathai, she's a formidable force in climate and development advocacy.
Good morning again. Wanjira Mathai really needs no introduction. She's made protecting the planet her lifelong mission. She's come all the way from Madagascar for this summit. And I remember when I spoke to her for the very first time, it was a Zoom call, and she was in a cafe in Nairobi, and I could literally hear the birds sing, and through her words as well. And then she so beautifully recounted the world in which she grew up in Kenya, surrounded by beauty, awe, wonder, and just the beauty of nature. And that was because of her mother, Mrs. Professor Wanjira Mathai, the reputed environmental advocate, environmentalist. And she made history in 2004 as the very first environmentalist and the very first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's been 20 years of that great honor, and it's so wonderful to have Wanjira here. She has followed in her mother's footsteps and made climate change and advocacy her, as I said, her lifelong mission. And I'm really curious to hear from you. So you're honoring 20 years of Professor Wanjira Mathai. How have you managed to keep that legacy alive? I mean, you started your career in public health, and you're sort of an accidental environmentalist. So how did that happen? How were you inspired by her journey, and how are you still living her legacy?
First of all, Renuka, thank you for having me. It's extraordinary to see all of these people and to be here celebrating African excellence. You know, one of the things I really believe in this season where everybody's really anxious about the geopolitical turbulence, that we have to stand on what we know is our excellence. And so I'm really glad that this is about celebrating African excellence. Yes, yes, indeed. Well, you know, I call myself an accidental environmentalist because I really felt like when I talk to other people's children, that when your parents do something, then you don't have to do it because it's done. You do something else. And so I was very much in public health, and I was working with community health and diseases that I had actually never heard of. These were what we call in health neglected diseases. And I was enjoying my career. But I started working with my mother almost slowly on the side and got absolutely absorbed by not only the genius of what she was doing, the connections she was making 20 years before about the environment, the connection to poverty, the connection to health. She truly believed the environment was the source of everything good. And that's what she told me all the time. There's nothing the environment needs from you,
right,
but you need everything you need to survive from the environment. That was profound for me.
Yes, true. And you've carved your own niche. I mean, she's been on the Time magazine list of most influential women for the last 2 years. So that says a lot. And to see a Kenyan up there on that list, it's truly incredible. But now, in your current role, I mean, in November last year, you were working with Prince William on the Earthshot Prize. You were with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Then there's so many notable names. So, you know, this kind of advocacy on a global stage, and you're taking Africa to that global stage. You're taking that conversation. But unfortunately, there are so many negative narratives as well. Around the climate crisis that the continent is facing. Can you just throw some light on that?
Yeah, it's sometimes very difficult to hear these negative narratives about our continent. And yet, so often, that's not the continent we know. When you see it said or see it written, you say, that's not the Africa I live in. I was born, I was raised, I live on the African continent today, I don't recognize that negativity.
Yeah.
But we do have to counter those narratives with our own. My mother often used to tell me that it's almost like constantly looking at yourself from somebody else's mirror.
Yeah.
They will never be good for you because the other person wants to see themselves in the best light. And therefore, you have to be seen in a little bit lesser light. We have to start seeing ourselves from our own glorious mirrors because we know we are better than that. Here it is, on climate alone, we know that the science is telling us the world will not achieve its climate goals. The world will not achieve its climate goals if Africa does not unlock her climate potential. And here's what I mean. Right. We have the youngest and fastest growing workforce in the world. Nowhere in the world is there an average median age of 19 years old, like we have in most African countries. That is huge for the future of growth and employment. We have the 60% of the best solar potential in the world. But that's not been unlocked. Right. And so we need to look at why. Let's not continue to talk about it. How do we unlock it? And that's where our leaders have to be put on the spot.
Sure.
We cannot continue to be led in a world that's so unconnected. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is supposed to create the largest trading bloc in the world. But it cannot happen if we cannot travel from one place to the next. I dream of a time when we will be able to travel across this continent, move ourselves, goods and services, without the very painful blocks, so that we have to go far away to then come back. We've got to make the movement of people on the African continent much easier. And then also the movement of goods, because it is that unity that will be our power. There's no other bloc as big as this one if we get together.
Right, and then you mentioned the young people. I mean, obviously it has a very good, the youth dividend is quite substantial here. What's the kind of compassion you see in them for the environment? What is their inkling of traditional knowledge systems to effect change, first of all?
Well, I think the young people of our continent are the most entrepreneurial in the world. They are solving problems. But there are also real opportunities to educate on AI. We are about to hear a panel on artificial intelligence, and I was listening and talking to them backstage. Unbelievable opportunities for young people to take on the employment and opportunities of the future. Because here's the thing. To run AI data hubs is going to require so much energy.
Right.
And we cannot afford, in a carbon-constrained world, for those data hubs to be in places that are not renewable energy resourced. The best renewable energy is right here on the African continent. So we need to see those data hubs for AI, and I hope they tell us that that's on the way, right here on the continent. So we need to figure out what we need to solve for to bring the hubs of the future here, because the energy of the future is here on the African continent. And our youth will be the ones to staff those. We're already educating. Countries like Rwanda are insisting on AI education for all university students. You cannot have a better promise than that. But we've got to make it happen.
That's wonderful. So, and with you actually are working on the ground, and even in your role with the World Resources Institute. Land restoration, that's another pet project for you, and there you're also working with women entrepreneurs in the renewable energy space. So can you just tell the audience a little bit about those initiatives? You know,
one of the things I like to say is nature is the natural air conditioner. We know that with nature we are cushioned against some of the worst impacts. When we talk about climate and health, so often we talk about diseases like COVID and others, and diseases that are crossing barriers of nature. What we forget is one of the most important health impacts of climate will be heat. Our cities will be so hot and hotter if they do not have parks and green spaces. And we know that our cities could and must develop more green infrastructure than they are today. And we have the opportunity, because just last week, we hosted the largest city gathering thinking about the cities of the future. And African cities have the greatest opportunity to build in futuristic greenways and parks and green spaces if our leadership gets it. And that's where we really have to continue to lean. And I'm glad, I come from Kenya, so if there are any Kenyans in the room, they know our young people are lining up to take on the accountability and transparency of leadership. We have to insist. My mother often told me that you will not, rights and opportunities are not going to be handed to you on a silver platter. You have to fight for them. You have to insist on them. You have to hold your leaders accountable. And also put yourself forward for leadership as well. So these are the opportunities.
That's
ahead.
great advice. And unfortunately, we have very little time. So I must end with saying that you're truly nature's warrior. And I just loved that bit when you talked about, when we spoke in December, you said, you know, when we were young, people would say, ask for where your house is, and everyone would say, just follow the trees, because that's the kind of environment your mother created. Absolutely. And hopefully we will continue to stay in that environment of beauty and awe and wonder. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Wanjira Mathai.